Hello. Uh, so I'm having a chat with ScuffedDario, who is currently playing here imminently. I got in touch with him the other day on his channel and was like, "Hey, dude, do you wanna chat?" Uh, and he was up for it, so we're chatting. Just gotta join his Discord, and then we can set up the call. Where's his Discord gone to? Okay, there we go. I'm on his Discord, and we'll be good to go in a moment. Just check that I'm actually sending voice. Yes, I am sending voice once. That's good. Okay, let's hope that this works. Hello.
Hello there.
Hey, man, how's it going?
Good morning. It's morning there as well, right?
It is indeed. It's let's see, 6:42 in the AM.
Oh, damn. Well, I hope you had a fine morning.
Yeah, I managed to have a nap, so I'm, refreshed and all good to go.
Cool. Well, do you want to introduce yourself for the stream real quick?
Sure, yeah. So my name's Laurie, and I'm kind of broadcasting as post-normal. Um, my background's in neuroscience. I've got a couple of degrees from Oxford, and I'm midway through a doctorate looking at various aspects of neuromodulation, so like implanted medical devices for treating neurological diseases. And my main academic claim to fame is some work on cybersecurity in brain implants. So the potential risk of essentially hackers getting access to neurological implants and causing all kinds of problems in patients who have those implanted.
Hmm. That's actually
Um,
super. I've never even thought about that.
Yeah,
Damn.
it's potentially quite a concerning area, though. There's a link to an article on my Twitch profile about it in Vice, I think. But yeah, it's not something I would be worried about, right away. But speculatively looking forward, as these implants get more complex and more common, I think it's something that people working in the field at least need to be quite concerned about.
Damn. Okay. And I believe you talked about some other things, right? You said,
Yes.
like in general, well, you said you also, what was it? You were looking into like existential risks in general.
Yeah, so this is an emerging area of academic interest for me. Well, it's something I've been interested in kind of in an amateur fashion for some time, and now studying more risk associated stuff to do with brain implants. I'm kind of getting a bit more into that sphere, and particularly I have recently been reading an excellent work on the topic by a Oxford philosopher called Toby Ord called The Precipice, which is an excellent distillation of the field of existential risk study into kind of one not too massive book. And that's well worth a read. The Precipice, if you're into interesting books, give that a download or a purchase or whatever. But yeah, so it's something that is very important, and I've been involved in this movement called effective altruism for quite some time now. And essentially, it's the idea that we have limited resources, but we can use evidence to work out where those resources are best spent, and then we should, spend lots of resources on the things that do the most good. So, for example, if you compare treating the long-term effects of AIDS versus treating HIV before it develops into AIDS, you'll find that the latter is far, far cheaper than the former. So, all else being equal, we should divert resources towards that. Now, this line of thinking gives us to seriously consider both what charities we can give to do the most good, but also other areas that we can contribute to. So Sunglasses Cats brings up politics, and absolutely there are some very effective political campaigns, and arguably, given the risks that Trump poses, donating to a Biden campaign is probably a pretty effective intervention at the moment. But there's other topics beyond the kind of traditional areas for charities that we should probably be concerned about. And a lot of these topics are very big picture issues, one of which being kind of global catastrophic risks and existential risks.
Cool. I guess do you have I guess do you specifically look into how like how does American politics fare into this? Because I would imagine quite a big deal, right?
Mm. Yeah, very much so. There's an excellent Vox article that does a good job of explaining this recently in the Future Perfect section. I'll see if I can dig it out. But essentially, there are a lot of risks that are very heavily impacted by the American government in general, and particularly the American executive. I'll just link this article in chat, would recommend that. So, Donald Trump, one of his many duties is engaging in stewardship of the US nuclear stockpile. He's responsible ultimately for commanding the nuclear forces. And let's just kind of pose a quick thought experiment. China begins very aggressive actions in the South China Seas, or maybe it's threatening Taiwan, and the global crisis boils over. Everyone's on the brink of war, and then NORAD, the system, the organization that watches for missiles incoming, gets a big warning on their screens. All of the telephones light up, and the president is dragged out of bed at 3 a.m. trying to comprehend what to do about this potential incoming nuclear strike. Has China just tried to decapitate the US leadership? Are there a bunch of intercontinental ballistic missiles raining down on Washington? Or is it a false alert? And that situation's happened before. It turned out to be a false alert. Fortunately, it's happened to both the US and Russia. And I just kind of pose to you, who would you rather have be the president in that situation? Trump or literally any other presidential candidate over the last 50 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess one of the things that I've looked into, I guess for Trump's policies versus like I guess Biden in this case, would be that it seems like Trump generally believes, I guess, that the U.S. should act unilaterally on like
Mm,
the world stage and basically do things without like the other country's approval. He's like very anti-NATO, um, like anti-building alliances and
yeah,
such. So yeah, that's I think that's like a very big concern with like the Trump presidency in general. Um,
hugely so. Yeah, so Trump has managed to pull out of, let me remember, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, better known as the Iran deal, the
Mm.
Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF, which was negotiated by Reagan and was arguably the greatest achievement of Reagan's administration, except for the fact that it was a missed opportunity, but we can maybe chat about that later. But also the Open Skies Treaty recently. He's thinking about cancelling New START, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and he's just generally engaged in a pattern of activity that is tearing apart the basic structure of international arms control. These are agreements that have made the world substantially and unambiguously safer over the last few decades. And whatever you think about, American imperialism or hegemony, about international relations, it's pretty difficult to deny that these strategic weapons control treaties have had a positive impact and have reduced the likelihood of the kind of nightmare scenario occurring that I just described. Now, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I just wanted to sort of quickly delve into a bit deeper into these. So I remember reading an article a few months ago, talking about how in the near future, I guess in the next 4 years specifically of like Trump's presidency, that
Mm,
a lot of these nuclear treaties or agreements would be coming up for like re-signing. I guess
yeah.
would this be some of them or?
Yeah, so the INF he allowed to lapse, so that was coming up for renewal during his presidency, and he didn't allow it to relapse. The main one, though, is New START. So New START is the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty that was signed with Russia, and which limits the overall number of nuclear warheads that each of Russia and the US is able to possess and able to have ready to use. And I think it's coming up for renewal in February of next year. So very, very soon after the presidency is handed over. And while Trump can do some damage right now, he can, forestall on negotiations, and he's been kind of pressuring Russia into doing something more with it. Putin has basically said that it's a perfectly good deal in its current form, and that's what the direction that the US was going in before Russia, and it's sorry, before Trump, and it's not a perfect deal by any means. It doesn't include China, which is Trump's main criticism of it. But the way you include China in these kind of agreements isn't to refuse to engage in them and threaten to pull out unilaterally, which is what he's doing. Um, but also, it's almost pointless to include China at the moment because pointless is perhaps overstating it, but China has around about 200 nuclear warheads that they keep under very restricted controls. They don't have them like ready to launch at a moment's notice, and at least up until very recently, partially in response to Trump's nonsense, they have had a very responsible nuclear policy, nuclear posture. US and Russia are the ones who are both essentially pointing big nuclear guns at each other and screaming, "Put down yours first," which isn't a great state of affairs to be in, and is what we're going to continue in if we get another 4 years of Trump.
Oh, this feels like fuck. I get sad listening to this.
Um, so there is a silver lining here, right?
What? Yeah. What's the silver lining, please?
So the silver lining is if we get past the next century or two as a species, we have the opportunity to vastly, vastly increase the collective worth of the human civilization. We have an opportunity to spread out into the stars, to engineer our cognitive states to experience ever greater states of bliss, and potentially colonize the entire universe, spreading our culture and good memes out through billions of galaxies. And that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. And even in shorter term, things have been getting better in almost every metric over the last 100 years or so. There are fewer people living in extreme poverty today than there ever have been since the pretty much since the start of sort of organized civilization, or at least since the population grew in the medieval period. And those factors, the better lifespan, reduced childhood mortality, increased food availability, increased education and entertainment, and all kinds of wonderful things. Those factors are all likely to continue for quite some time to come. So the world is in many, many respects getting a hell of a lot better. But that just means it's all the more important to avoid really very bad scenarios like nuclear war. Now, fortunately, nuclear war probably won't wipe us out as a species, though it is still a very big concern in terms of causing a lot of damage to us. A nuclear war is unlikely to kill every human, but it could kill a good portion of us and set us back for centuries, which is obviously why we want to very much avoid it. But,
I'm
sorry,
curious. Do you think how likely do you think like nuclear war is in like the next 10 years? Because I've I've talked to a few people about this.
mm,
And sort of the argument that I hear repeated always is, who cares about these nuclear treaties or whatever?
mm.
Like, there's no way we'll ever be facing a nuclear war.
It's obviously very difficult to predict the likelihood of these things, and it depends on obviously a lot of factors. What I can say with some confidence is that there's a big difference in types of nuclear war, of the kind of scale of uh, nuclear war, and the difference between say excuse me say North Korea launching a handful of very lightweight ICBMs at the west coast of the US and maybe getting a glancing hit on Los Angeles or something is both far less scary and probably substantially more likely than a an all-out, US versus Russia, everybody fire all the missiles kind of war. But the scale of devastation is far greater. The difference could be between 100,000 dead and uh, a billion dead, which is obviously quite a large range, 4 orders of magnitude. So, what one of the main things we should be interested in is trying to minimize the risk of a really big nuclear war, and that's what these arms control treaties do, or a lot of them, is reduce the number of weapons available so that if we do get into a shooting match, it's 100 nukes rather than 1,000 or 10,000. Uh, but there's also the kind of geopolitical aspect that I'm far less expert on, where we want to challenge other nuclear powers or potential nuclear powers and prevent them building up their arsenals without being so hostile that we increase the risk of accidentally inciting a escalatory conflict.
Hmm.
I do have a video from a few weeks back about the kind of trying to get a sense of scale in nuclear war, which I'll
Sure.
just link in your chat if that's all right.
Yeah, it's fine. It seems also that
Mm.
like some people specifically think that it's gonna lower the chance of nuclear war by having like all the other states nuclearized, like by having like Iran get nuclear weapons, North Korea, like all these things. Um,
So I should state just clearly I don't have any formal background in international relations and
no,
I'm
yeah,
not an expert in geopolitics, but yeah, that's a fucking dumb take. Some people make it and
yeah.
it's worrying because part of the issue here, one of the really big issues in nuclear security is miscommunication. So um, sunglasses cats again with a base take. Mistakes happen as history shows, and that's absolutely correct. There have been a lot of mistakes, a lot of close calls, where we have gotten perilously close to a full-on nuclear shooting war. And the more states have those have nuclear weapons, the easier it is to start making those mistakes, to start misinterpreting a challenge or just an act that's not intended to be hostile as a threat of nuclear
Hmm.
war.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there's also the greater risk of, if one of the major risks of nuclear war at the moment is India and Pakistan. And so if India and Pakistan started firing at each other, it would be bigger than North Korea sending one or two over, but much smaller than an all-out Russia-US war. But it would have global consequences in terms of a rapid lowering of the planet's temperature, which not just to the degree that it counteracts global warming, but going far below and causing all kinds of problems, crop failures, and so forth. Um, but it also, these kind of wars are far more likely the more regional powers have access to them. So if say Iran and Iraq both got nuclear weapons and started pointing them at each other, that would be an extra layer of risk that could set off a wider conflict. If India and Pakistan start firing them, maybe one goes over to China, China gets involved, or China misinterprets signals, starts firing, and then it all gets very, very messy.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess fuck. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how I guess let's say that two relatively small countries like next to each other want to get into nuclear war.
Yeah.
Um how potentially devastating could that be for like the rest of the world?
Mhm.
Because there's like different types of like nuclear weapons, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to, I guess, think about. Hmm.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and there absolutely are. Uh, there are a lot of different sort of scales of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, like
Modern,
how bad would it get? I guess. Let's say that India and Pakistan or whatever get into like some kind of nuclear war. Um, how bad could it get for the rest of the world? Or do you think that maybe the bigger superpowers would somehow stop them? Like, do you think the U.S. would, if the U.S. was suspicious of somebody else planning to
mm,
use nukes, do you think that the U.S. would turn to nukes to stop them?
I I suspect not. A nuclear first strike from the US would be a very, very bold move. I mean, who knows with Trump in charge, but I suspect they
Hmm.
wouldn't. But they might well try, a special forces strike or a very targeted global strike using conventional weapons to take out the country's leadership. Incidentally, this is one of the, excuse me, interesting and destabilizing weapon systems that the US has, is they're now able to use what's called, I think it's prompt global strike or something like that, where they can use conventional weapon systems from bombers or intercontinental missiles to deliver non-nuclear payloads to take out, say, one guy's palace with almost no ability to react. And this potentially is destabilizing because it makes dictators all the more likely to fire off their nukes if they have any reason to believe they're about to be attacked. But in terms of a regional nuclear war, say against the India versus Pakistan, there would immediately be uh, millions to tens of millions of deaths from the nuclear weapons and the firestorms that would rage as a result. But the more concerning aspect is the development of a nuclear winter. So this is the kind of global temperature drop that I mentioned. Uh, Nukes going off in the desert is not great, but like the Nevada test site, for example, Nevada test site. But if you set off nukes in cities or uh, in forested areas or anything like that, you get a lot of very dark smoke that goes extremely high into the atmosphere and will settle around the Earth's atmosphere and create a layer that blocks sunlight or reflects sunlight off. And you end up with a situation where not enough sunlight is, or not as much sunlight is getting to the Earth, crops start failing, and there's the current data indicates that a kind of India-Pakistan nuclear war would probably devastate food supplies for more than a billion people. So there would be extreme food security and probably massive migration and deaths of, again, tens and tens of millions more people. Um, so even a quote unquote small war is going to be very, very bad.
Hmm.
Scaling that up to into superpower nuclear conflict makes things even worse because you get that on an even greater scale.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
I should note that the exact extent of a nuclear winter is still an area of debate, although an area that doesn't see enough debate. So part of the problem with existential risk more broadly is that it's an extremely underserved area of study. In the last decade or so, there's only been a handful of studies looking at nuclear winter, despite the fact that it does have relevance to not just nuclear war, but the potential for asteroid strikes, although they're not a very big risk, don't worry about them too much, and a couple of other areas of potential existential risk. The Like I say, the current best understanding, is that it would be bad, but probably not world-ending. You know, there would certainly still be some places around the world, particularly in the southern hemisphere, that would still get adequate sunlight and would still be able to grow crops just fine. And you know, even with a very very bad nuclear winter, some people would survive by using LED-grown crops and so forth in greenhouses. So it's unlikely to kill us all, but it could kill a lot of us.
Do you want to do a existential risk ranking chart of like the biggest one?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
I'm like I'm thinking, okay,
Mm.
we've got climate change, we've got nuclear war, we've got what is it, like hacking of bio implants, we've got artificial intelligence. I
Yeah.
mean, we got all the good ones.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I actually have Toby Ord's book here, and he does exactly this. So he puts a rough probability estimation on each of these risks. Now, I should emphasize these are rough. Like I say, there's not been enough research in this area in general. Toby Ord is a wonderful researcher, but he's just one philosopher with some economics and sort of computer science training, trying to work all this stuff out. Um, these are all based on the best available data, but you know, by the nature of being estimates, they're very rough. Nevertheless, it's a pretty decent kind of ranking of the general levels of risk that we face from each of these. I should also preface this by saying these are the risks of an existential risk occurring over the next 100 years. So something occurring that either completely wipes out our species or reduces our species to the point that we can't uh, basically survive any longer. You know, if global warming, for example, reduced us to the state that we weren't going to recover any technology and we're definitely going to die within a few centuries, by later in the century, that would count as an existential risk. Um, Also important to note, this doesn't take into account global catastrophic risks or things that are less bad than everyone dying.
Hmm.
I don't want to give the impression that things like natural diseases are trivial just because they're not an existential risk, but we're specifically talking here about things that will wipe us all out. Um, so things like asteroids or comet impacts, probably within the next 100 years, probably about 1 in a million, which is good news. Uh, that is very encouraging, and we know that because of a lot of research done by NASA to track all of the asteroids vaguely near Earth and check that they're not on a collision course with Earth. So other natural risks, things like stellar explosions, are at about 1 in 1 billion. Supervolcanic eruptions, about 1 in 10,000. So overall, total natural risk is on the order of something like 1 in 10,000. Um, Turns out the natural world isn't that scary to us. We've done a pretty good job of mastering all the things that could have wiped us out historically, like a big supervolcano would potentially cause, much like the nuclear winter, global cooling and problems with crops, but we'd probably survive as a species. So now we get onto the man-made risks, and these are significantly more concerning, largely because over the last century or so, we've developed a bunch of technologies, and we're in the process of developing a bunch of technologies that are extremely powerful. And by powerful, I mean they have the ability to change the world in our image in very effective ways. Most of those technologies, most of the time, are absolutely wonderful. I can chat with you in Denmark, and we can be listened to by all people from across the world and have lovely conversations thanks to the magic of semiconductors and LEDs and so on and so forth. Um, but powerful technology can also potentially alter the world in very bad ways. So the most obvious of these, as we've been discussing, nuclear war. Um, about 1 in 1,000, so not the kind of odds you want to be, making strong bets on. I probably wouldn't cross the road very much if crossing the road gave me a 1 in 1,000 chance of dying. But
Yeah, I was just thinking like 1 in 1,000. I mean, it doesn't sound too bad, but like when you're talking about a literal fucking nuclear war, I don't know.
yeah, and this is
Yeah.
just the risk of nuclear war wiping us out. So the if I were pressed, going back to your earlier question, of giving an estimate for how likely is nuclear war to occur per se, how likely is someone to set off a nuke in anger over the next, say, century, I would probably put it at better than 50-50. Um, but the chances of that uh, uh, actually wiping us out is like I say relatively small. So um, so assuming both those estimates are true, if there's a 50-50 chance of it occurring, well then only 1 in 500 nuclear wars would actually lead to all of us dying, as opposed to just a lot of us dying. Um, so climate change, again, on the order of 1 in 1,000. Um, so that isn't at all to reduce the importance of dealing with climate change. It's going to cause a lot of very, very nasty effects over the coming decades. But there are, without necessarily, we can go into this in a bit more detail later if you like, but there are a bunch of strategies we could use to mitigate the most extreme effects of climate change. And even the most pessimistic estimates, um, even the most pessimistic estimates uh, don't put us anywhere near the territory of the whole world being uninhabitable completely.
Yeah. That's what I guess when we're talking strictly from the perspective of like essential risk, or threats to like humanity, um, I think rarely people talk about climate change in those terms, right? Like people usually talk about like great replacement um, of like people and resources and like the refugee crisis 2.0, but like 100 times worse, like stuff like that. Um,
Yeah, I think that's absolutely an important point. That in the somewhere in the rhetoric, sometimes you get people kind of going, if we don't act now, the world will end in, if we don't act now or within the next 10 years, the world's going to end, that kind of thing, which is hyperbole that I don't think serves the cause. We can make the argument that climate change is very worrying. It's going to cause trillions in economic damage. It's going to cause thousands to millions of deaths. All of this very bad stuff, without arguing that it's definitely going to kill us all. Um, so Elysium, trying to troll, brings up what about climate change-driven nuclear war, Pepe, and that's an excellent point. Uh, the combination of existential risks. So each of these estimates is kind of an estimate for this individual risk killing us all. But in practice, there's a good chance that if any of these were to kill us all, it would be a combination of factors. So, like a nuclear war, um, a, causing a nuclear winter that is exacerbated by climate change because the shift in temperatures is far worse, or there's already a oh hey official Neb TV in my chat. Um, but yeah, because there's already a kind of baseline there that makes us more vulnerable to these threats. Um, so yeah, combining of risks is a really important point. Um, and
Do you also think that like yeah, like talk about combining of risks,
mm,
right? Because I would say something like global warming could definitely lead to like nuclear war and could lead to like
yep,
all of these technologies being pushed even more.
yep, scramble for resources, absolutely.
Yeah. Hmm.
So other environmental damage, again in the kind of 1 in 1,000 region. Um, that is things like catastrophic ecosystem collapse caused by um, acidification of the oceans that caused by like other man-made systems than climate change, things like this. Um, there's various ways that this could occur, but we just don't know enough about the interplay of ecosystems to really be confident about what could cause it. So it's kind of one of these risks that's currently mainly a bad risk because there's so much unknown in it. Um, Naturally occurring pandemics, things like COVID-19, is kind of it's sort of in the anthropogenic category because all of these pandemics are made considerably worse by the way that we interact with the environment. So, like the fact that the SARS-CoV-2 probably spread from a wet lab in Wuhan, or at least a wet lab, sorry, wet market in Wuhan, probably didn't spread from a lab. Um, but it's likely exacerbated by the encroachment into different biospheres. However, fortunately, naturally occurring pandemics are unlikely to wipe us out. About 1 in 10,000, on the same kind of order as all other natural risks. Um, Largely because even something like the Black Death, which wiped out nearly half of Europe's population and a sizable chunk of the entire global population, um, didn't come particularly close to wiping us all out because there are almost always going to be some people in the population who are immune to some degree, or it's such a bad disease that it burns itself out before it can spread
Hmm.
very far. Um, but that brings me on to the scarier side of pandemics, which is engineered pandemics. Now,
Do you do you think that's gonna be a thing in the future? Fuck,
quite
that would
possibly.
be.
So
Oh
just to be
damn.
clear, COVID-19 is definitely
This
not an engineered
not right.
pandemic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely,
Okay.
definitely not. Um,
Yeah.
I've looked into this because engineered pandemics are um, a particularly concerning area, and if this were an engineered pandemic, I would sure as fuck want to know. Um, but the genetic evidence, the it's not impossible. It's like accidentally slipped out of a lab. There's maybe like a 5% chance or something. But if it did, it wasn't engineered. It wasn't deliberate. Like there are lab failures all the time, and that's a real cause of concern. The fact that there are a lot of biosafety level 4 labs that um, that do have security breaches and do just accidentally, a researcher goes home with a vial of something in their pocket because they forgot it was there, the stupid shit that any organization does. Um, but engineered pandemics could be malicious, or they could be labs who make those kind of mistakes, who have an accident while working on science to hopefully improve security. So, for example, the excuse me, the H5N1 bird flu. There's been research on that. It's a very lethal disease, but it doesn't transmit very well in humans. But there's been research that has looked at mutating it and has successfully mutated it in a way that becomes much more transmissible. Now, there's certainly an argument to be made that this research is interesting and valuable and gives us insights into mutation processes. But it's also really, really fucking dangerous because uh, sorry, because bird flu H5N1 has a lethality rate in the region of 50%. If it were able to spread with the efficacy of COVID-19, then yeah, the and that's just like that's not using any kind of advanced technology. They were just mutating it in like in cell culture, sort of doing natural mutations, quote unquote. Um, so if someone managed to get a hold of that, or if they managed to get a hold of just the DNA sequence of that, then they would be able to go to various online retailers and have a DNA construct printed out. This is something that I've worked in labs. I get emails all the time from people offering to sell me this stuff because as soon as your email goes up attached to a scientific paper, you get a bunch of spam about best test tubes today and buy this viral vector to enhance your lab work and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, yeah, 12 monkeys is it's not that far off. Um,
Oh, fuck. I feel like like whenever we talk about like biological catastrophes
mm,
or like fucking pandemics and all these things, I get fucking jittery all over my body. I'm like fuck. I would almost rather have like I don't know this is bad to say, but I would almost rather have like fucking um climate change
mm.
catastrophe or whatever, or like a nuclear war, because it seems like much more palpable.
Yeah, I know
Like
what you
I
mean.
can't even, yeah, I can't even imagine like fucking a disease slowly spreading around the world, and you read about it in the news every day, and like, what the fuck are you gonna do? Like, fucking close yourself off? I mean,
Yeah,
even worse. I mean, fuck.
I mean, look at
Ugh.
what we're going through globally at the moment. Um,
Yeah, and it isn't even like a like a bird flu kind of thing, right?
yeah,
It's a fucking yeah.
it's case fatality. Sorry, yeah, the case fatality rate is the infection fatality rate is almost certainly below 2%, or very probably below 2% for uh, COVID-19, which is very much not good. I'm not at all saying that the lockdown
No,
isn't a
yeah,
good
yeah,
idea, but imagine if it were 20%,
yeah,
let
yeah.
alone 50, 60%, and there are diseases that are in that region. So
Like
that's about. Oh, sorry.
just thinking about now and like how people are like actively struggling every single day from like from just like
Mm,
COVID fear and like anxiety and like
yeah,
it's like I can feel it spreading online. Like people are fucking getting more and more um mentally sick every single day just because of the like just thinking about like the people dying every single day from COVID. It's,
yeah.
if it was worse than that, uh, damn.
My fiance works in psychology, and she's doing some interesting internet-based research because obviously her lab work has been completely fucked over by
Yeah.
by COVID. But fortunately, she's redirected to an interesting study looking at the mental effects of COVID-19 and the psychological stress that it's causing. And while she hasn't got any results out yet, it is definitely a very concerning aspect of the pandemic. And as you say, if we had to do this for years on end with no contact with family whatsoever, and everyone having to wear gas masks when they went outside and all this kind of thing, that would be a horrible state of affairs. Um, and I don't mean to alarm you further, but the main reason why this and certain other risks are concerning is the democratization of access to what are essentially weapons of mass destruction. So,
Hmm.
by this I mean the barrier of entry to making a bioweapons program, to making a viable, deadly disease that one could spread and kill a lot of people with, has gone down from being a fairly major nation state in the mid 20th century, like US, Russia, UK, China all had bioweapons programs, but a few other countries did have them, but just weren't able to do much with them because it's expensive and you need lots of testing and scientific expertise and so forth. Whereas now, to turn if I emailed or if someone emailed me the uh, the DNA code the all of the base pairs of smallpox. With my friends, I could probably get it turned into a like um, viable virus, within a few months. Uh, yeah, as Epic says, it can be done in a basement lab. There are biohackers today who are working on transfecting yeast, and a lot of it's for very cool stuff. So I'm type 1 diabetic, and I'm very excited about the Open Insulin project, which is working to produce viable human-ready insulin in yeast that anyone could go up and set up and start producing insulin. It's hugely expensive in the US at the moment. They could turn it to pennies per unit, which would be fantastic. But with that technology also comes the ability for people working in their basement with not necessarily a huge amount of expertise, maybe undergraduate or a little bit of graduate work in biosciences, being able to produce diseases that are potentially world-ending. So this is about 1 in 30, Toby Ord estimates, chance of occurring in the next century.
1 in 30.
Yeah, of specifically wiping us all out. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so there's some other anthropogenic risks. So things like nanotechnology. Um, you might have heard of grey goo. The grey goo isn't a big.
No. Can you explain?
Oh, sure, yeah. So grey goo
I
is
mean,
basically.
obviously, I've heard about it, but for the chat.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So grey goo was first proposed in, I think, 1986 in a book called Engines of Creation by Eric Drexler. And basically the idea is you get nanobots, tiny nanoscale robots, hence nanobot, um,
Hmm.
that are, say, the size of a human cell or smaller, that are capable of going over material, potentially any matter, and breaking chemical bonds, disassembling it at a molecular level, and thence turning the world into a grey sludge because everything has been turned into dissociated matter that doesn't have any form or structure. Um, and if these robots capable of self-replicating, then they spread out and turn the world into goo. Now, fortunately, this isn't actually a big risk. Grey goo scenario, don't worry about it. There are various like thermodynamic reasons and uh, reasons of sort of technological advancement that indicate that we probably don't need to worry about this. It's unlikely to happen. However, nanotechnology could give us the possibility of constructing atomically precise uh, items in any form that we want. So having something that's maybe a bit like a desktop printer um, that is capable of printing up layer by layer, adding layers of atoms on in order to build up a 3D structure of a diamond laptop or a any kind of food you want or
Yeah.
basically anything it has the feedstock for, the base elements for. Now, this could be like the Star Trek replicator is basically this. Um, and that would be super cool. We just go up and like tea Earl Grey hot, and you get a nice hot cup of Earl Grey. The problem is if I walk up to the replicator and say hypersonic missile, then if it doesn't have adequate controls, and it could be very, very difficult to add those controls, it might print me off a small missile capable of traveling at hypersonic speed and killing anyone on Earth, which would probably be bad because we don't want kids going up to their mum and dad's printer and in the home office and printing out uh, minor weapons of mass destruction. So that's
I would fall that
potentially,
under the pretty bad category.
yeah, yeah. um, so nanotechnology is one of those potential risks, and there's some other kind of more potentially widespread effects of it. If we get bad nanobots, they might not disassemble the world, but they could cause a whole bunch of health problems or various issues like that.
Have you
Um,
heard about the Fermi paradox? Is it the Fermi? Am I?
yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the issue of the fact that the Drake equation says if we multiply the number of planets by the number of stars by etc etc and put in the probability of life arising on a planet and the probability of intelligent life arising on a planet, then we get even uh, uh, with billions and billions of stars, we would expect to see some number of aliens, but we don't see them, or at least we don't hear from them. So why is that? That's the Fermi paradox. We would expect based on that kind of the math to see aliens, but we don't. Um, so I actually have a video exactly on this topic with so for chat, I'm not a philosopher myself. I'm interested in it. I'm more of a scientist myself. But I have chatted with one of the world expert philosophers on just this topic. Um, and I'll just find my YouTube video um,
Do you do
called
mainly YouTube or do you
I
stream?
I stream on Twitch and it automatically gets uploaded to YouTube and then I like edit them down a little bit.
Oh,
Um,
cool. Wait, how
so
do you automatically upload
oh,
from?
restream.io.
Does it automatically upload to YouTube? Really?
Yeah, yeah. So it can simultaneously stream to like Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, fucking whatever at the same time. Basically, your OBS or whatever software you're using streams out to Restream, and then they stream it on to all the different services at once. Um, so it is a paid service, I think, unless you want a little like watermark on your page.
Oh,
But I don't actually know how much it is because I'm collaborating with the Oxford Scientific Society on producing some stuff, and they just gave me access to it, so
sure. Okay,
I'm not complaining. Um,
fine.
but yeah, so here we go. Here's the link. Why does it always do the T thing? Right. So Anders is an excellent philosopher, and like I say, is legitimately a world expert on both the Fermi paradox and existential risk. So I have him on my channel quite regularly because we like chatting. Um, so yeah, where were we? Let's see.
Yeah, we were talking about I guess the Fermi paradox because I was
Yeah.
interested in like how because I feel like when we add all of these risks up, um, or do you think that's like a valid way to go about it, like adding up the risks of all these things, or do you think these are like fundamentally like excluding each other? So, for example, I guess no. I guess no. You would say the contrary, right? You would say, well, or maybe you wouldn't. Would you say that if climate change sort of starts happening
Mm.
in like in a more significant way than it is right now, would you say that that increases the risks of these other things happening?
It depends very much on the individual risks. So there are some ways in which these risks are completely independent. So, say the risk of our getting smashed by a comet is pretty much completely independent of
Yeah.
our, burning more fossil fuels. There might be some effects, like maybe if
Could that ever happen, actually? Because I don't like now I'm just talking about like movies and stuff. Like whenever it happens in a movie, we shoot it down with like nuclear weapons or
oh yeah,
whatever. Does that
nukes
make sense?
probably not, but we do actually have quite a few at least compelling theoretical strategies for how to deal with an incoming asteroid or comet or whatever. So one of the ideas is just worth noting. One of the challenges of this research is coming up with ways of deflecting it that can't be used to weaponize asteroids, because we probably
Oh,
don't want nations being able to smack each other with asteroids from space. Um,
yeah,
but
probably a
yeah,
bad
so
idea.
one of the ways would be to just send up a big spaceship with loads of paint, and paint one side of it white so it reflects more solar radiation, which puts a small amount of force on it. And if we calculate the orbits correctly, we can get it out of an orbital trajectory that's likely to hit Earth.
Wait,
Um,
really?
yeah, yeah. Seriously, just paint one side white. Um,
Okay.
now these are somewhat theoretical. We haven't, and there does need to be more research into these. Um, but it would probably be okay. because the further away you do it, the more effective it is. You just need to do a tiny little force on an asteroid that's the other side of the solar system, and it'll miss us by millions of miles. Whereas if it's a few months away from hitting, we might be limited to potentially to blowing it up and hoping it fragments enough to burn up mostly in the atmosphere. Although that's a very, very risky strategy and not something we will want to do until the last minute, and it almost certainly wouldn't result in the kind of trivial damage that we see in Armageddon or whatnot.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, the other kind of anthropogenic risks, things like nanotechnology and whatnot, somewhere around 1 in 50, they're less concerning than engineered pandemics, which are the kind of
What are the highest risks? Like ranking from like highest to I guess to going a few I guess steps down.
well,
What?
we've pretty much reached the top of the pile, which, according to Toby Ord at least, and according to a lot of people who work in this field, is unaligned artificial general intelligence.
Hmm.
So this is AI risk, which I'm sure everyone in chat has been excited to hear about.
Hell
Um,
yeah.
so that Toby Ord puts at about 1 in 10 um, chance of wiping us all out, but it's kind of unique among the risks because it's potentially the most flexible and most powerful technology.
Well, it has
Um,
the most benefit as well, I would say. It's
exactly.
hard to find benefit in like nuclear war or climate
Well,
change.
nuclear war and climate change. So they're both nuclear war comes alongside nuclear power, and nuclear power and our understanding of splitting the atom, and our ability to generate isotopes for medical treatments and for
Hmm.
research treatments. Nuclear technology generally, um, probably on net, has had a positive effect so far on the world, but came
Yeah,
with this
that's fair.
big Pandora's box of nuclear war. Similarly,
Yeah.
climate change is as a result of industrialization, which has had massive effects, positive effects on the world.
Yeah.
It's just that it's a very unfortunate externality of burning a bunch of fossil fuels and getting a bunch of useful work done. Oh, I wish we had Al Gore as president. I met him once. He's a lovely chap. Um, but
Wait, how old are you?
I'm 30. I was
Okay.
16 or 17 at the time.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Um,
Yeah, I was like, you don't look that old.
oh, thank you.
Uh,
I think it's just the overly intense lighting I've got going on.
yeah.
Um, but uh, yeah, so nuclear technology and climate change both have some, or at least emissions, uh, have a bunch of benefits, but they come with these big trade-offs. And the same is true for artificial general intelligence, or AI, sort of in general. So first, I think it's worth emphasizing what kind of benefits we might experience, because it's it's important to not kind of lose sight of that, and not just go let's ban all machine learning, because
Hmm.
that's going to definitely solve all our problems. No, that's idiotic, and potentially going to give up the greatest invention we ever need to make. Um, so just on a basic level, AI has the ability to radically improve the assignment of resources. It potentially do a whole bunch of tasks in government, not necessarily big policy decisions, at least initially, but a bunch of tasks in government that would make it more efficient and more equal and more reasonable. It can do it could potentially just automate basically every task that a human now has to do. Um, that is boring and repetitive and unengaging, and free us up for a life of no meaningful material scarcity, of extremely good health, because the AI is capable of diagnosing all diseases and um, engineering better lives for us, and potentially trillions and trillions and trillions of people living extremely long, extremely happy lives because we have the ability to. I suppose it's worth briefly talking about what is intelligence. So, in its basis form, intelligence is the ability to get things done, to achieve goals that you set out to through planning and learning and understanding and so forth. Now, intelligence is composed of a bunch of different cognitive tasks, such as memory, such as spotting differences, pattern recognition. All of these different factors come together to produce intelligence. It's unlikely that we'll ever have an AI that, unless we specifically engineer it for shits and giggles, um, it's unlikely we'll ever have an AI that specifically is exactly as intelligent as humans in all different domains, because AI is already far more intelligent than humans in certain domains. It's much better at visual recognition of faces than we are. It's much better at discriminating different dog breeds and a whole bunch of visual learning tasks that 5 years ago it was all right at, and 20 years ago it had just no ability to do, basically. Um, so AI has the potential to be as good at that, as good as it is in visual identification in a whole bunch of different fields. And if it can apply very, very effective problem solving in a whole bunch of different fields at once, then it's what we would term super intelligent or artificial general intelligence. And if it can do most of the things that a human can some of the time far, far better, then it's solved a bunch of jobs. We can all like sit around on Twitch chatting to each other and spreading memes and whatever, or we can spend our time writing great works of poetry and literature and helping the AIs with exploring interesting ideas or whatever. Um, but
What do you think? Before we move on, I
sure,
guess,
sure.
or continue, do you what do you think are sort of the ways to lower the risks of AI while
Mm,
maximizing sort of the benefits? Because I've heard like a lot of
mm,
different theories. There's basically like there's a theory of having it or like building an AI within like a completely sealed off
mm.
location, like a whatever, like a black box room or whatever, where we would have no way of interacting with it outside of what we wanted it to do,
Yeah,
um, which I think is flawed.
yeah.
And then there's yeah, and then there's the other theories of like basically symbiosis of some kind, like
Mm.
somehow building AI into ourselves so that if the AI kills us, then it would kill itself. Um, Something
Yeah,
like that.
I think the latter of the two is more probable, though we still don't have a. So the latter of the two is kind of my area, right? I work in brain implants. That's my
Yeah,
background, and
that's what that's
mm,
yeah.
and yeah, it's definitely a potential thing, and Elon Musk is chasing it with Neuralink, and I think it's an interesting project, although potentially quite a scary one. Um, and the main issue is currently we just have no real understanding of the way the brain transmits information within itself. We've decoded a few specific areas, but the actual way that those areas interact and build up a kind of coherent picture and how we can reliably interface with them over an extended period of time, all of this is just very poorly understood. So we need to make those advancements, and if we're going to, we probably need to make them quite quickly if we're going to build in an integration between AI and our minds. Um, so I think it is potentially a viable option, and so part of the problem here is trying to work out human desires. this is really the core as I understand it. Not an expert in machine learning or anything, but as many researchers like Stuart Armstrong, who I had on my channel recently, and Stuart Russell, who wrote an excellent book called Human Compatible, would probably argue, is that we need to find ways of getting AI to be friendly. So getting it to want to achieve our goals and our preferences, not just as we state them and as we claim them, or even as we kind of immediately reflexively seem to exhibit them, but as we would want to have them if we had the most amount of information we could. So, for example, if I tell an AI, I've got my little AI buddy, and I say it's very, very intelligent, very capable of doing anything, but its goals aren't, or its goal setting system maybe isn't ideal. So I tell it, I want some coffee. Now, what I'm actually communicating to it is I want it to go over to the coffee machine that I know is down the hall, get me a cup of coffee, and come back. But if it's taking that goal very literally, it first probably will disable its off switch if it can, because it will know that the best chance of it getting coffee is going to occur with it being able to operate. Um, then, second, it'll go to the coffee machine, and if it finds it's empty, it'll start a never-ending quest to find me coffee, spending any resources it wants to, and killing anyone who's in the way, just to make sure I get that cup of coffee in the morning. Um, so obviously we have potential ways around this of setting the conditions such that it understands that I don't want it to infinitely follow the drive for coffee, that I want it to not spend infinite resources, etc., etc.
Mm.
But we can't set that for every possible situation manually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we've got to have it able to learn what we want in some kind of way that involves watching us and observing our behavior. But we also, some of our behavior is really bad. So if everybody on the more drama-prone sections of Twitter, for example, had personal AI that did fulfill their wishes and did fulfill their wishes as they wanted to, we'd have a whole bunch of people getting doxxed and getting murdered because they got pissed off at each other on Twitter, and they genuinely wanted their own AI to go and harm this person the other end of the internet, which we probably don't want. So we need the AIs to have some form of kind of sensor in there, of mechanism of detecting when the person giving them orders is giving them an order it shouldn't follow, or when the person it's trying to protect or help or whatever doesn't give them an order but clearly wants them to do something. Like if an old person falls down or something like that, we might get AIs just sitting there going, hello Margaret, hello Margaret, while she's got a broken hip and unable to speak or something. So we need to find that way of getting it to infer our goals, and because it's potentially a lot smarter than us, to work out what we would actually want if we were smarter. And so this is the kind of um, yeah, and we need to do it in a way that won't be hacked, which is pretty fucking critical. Especially if the hacking might be extremely subtle, or just things like spamming it with Nazi phrases in order to get the machine learning algorithm to report Nazi shit, or to repeat Nazi shit. So
Yeah, it seems like fuck. It seems like whatever we could do, uh, fuck. It seems like a catch-22 kind of problem. Like whatever we could do as humans to restrict it from not doing bad things, it feels like it could be circumvented by other humans by
mm,
hacking it, right? So the only way to fix that would be to make it protect itself, but that would also mean that we lose control.
exactly, yeah, and it can be manipulated by other humans, but potentially also manipulated by itself. If we give it that control over itself, then it will be able to change its own goals and values and so forth. Um, but it'll also potentially be able to improve itself and make itself more intelligent. and in which case it might start messing with other AI systems. It might start developing goals we don't want it to. So we need it to not only figure out what goals it wants us to have, or what goals we want to have in an ideal world, but or close to an ideal world. We don't necessarily want it optimizing for idealness because that causes a whole bunch of problems potentially. But we want it to improve itself, continuing to hold that goal in mind of making the world better in ways that we would want it to, while still becoming massively, massively more intelligent and more capable. And getting that balancing line between having it useful. It's like the boxing thing you brought up, an Oracle AI, so one that we just ask kind of very basic, maybe yes or no
Yeah.
questions. If we stick that in a box, then maybe there's some reason to believe not, but maybe it's safe. We can just ask it a question and it'll give us a yes no answer. But that's far, far less useful than AI that's able to connect to the internet and is able to,
Yeah.
take care of all of our personal business and do all of the things that we'd actually want an AI to do. Um, and it's also important just to kind of briefly mention that when we're talking about AI, there's a huge range of potential systems we're talking about here, and it's likely that it's important not to anthropomorphize them because there's a pretty good chance that it won't be conscious in any meaningful sense. Um, Maybe we don't know. It depends on how
We
this
would
thing
we would
develops.
I guess we would fuck. Yeah, I feel like we would probably try not to make it.
Most likely, although it's very difficult to
It's
know
hard.
what is conscious, and that's a whole
Yeah,
different
exactly.
discussion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Let's not get into that.
yeah, yeah. Way too early for that. But
Um,
oh shit, I love the corn pop meme. That's good.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, so yeah, basically we're needing to, on the one hand, avoid the kind of anthropomorphization, the whole it's Terminator, it's going to try to kill us all because it hates us or whatnot, um, and shift more to a view of AIs as very powerful tools that could go very, very wrong if we don't adequately understand them and understand how to interact with them and how to set their goals and their values.
Hmm. So, I guess maybe to wrap it up a little bit,
Sure.
cause I gotta also get to work a bit later
Yeah, no
today.
problem. No problem.
I guess I want to ask you, cause AI, I think AI is the one like that I'm like mostly interested in. Cause I
Yeah.
think that's like I think AI is fundamental to the future of humanity and like sort of
Yeah.
human prosperity. And I guess what would be your I guess your prescriptions in terms of like how should we handle the AI discourse and like how would you sort of like what precautions would you take um in terms of like minimizing the risks? I don't know if that's something you've looked into, but yeah.
Yeah, so the main thing is more money for research. At the moment, it's not. It would be a very bad idea for government to start sort of just randomly regulating this because it might end up causing more problems than good. And there's a massive coordination problem because if the US starts slowing AI development, then China's just going to continue full on a pace, and potentially, we end up in a world where it's only the Chinese social credit AI that has control over everything, which we probably
Yeah,
don't want.
cause I've heard that China is going pretty hardcore
Yeah.
on like
Oh
funding
yeah.
the technology and all that. Yeah.
And so current funding is in the like tens to hundreds of billions a year. We're spending a lot on AI research, with good reason. As you say, it's likely to radically improve the future of humanity. Just take you're like kind of left anarchist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're have you ever read the culture novels?
The culture novels?
Yeah, Ian M. Banks.
No. No.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you'd love them. It's basically a anarchist utopia ruled by AIs, and kind of novels dealing with the societal challenges that a like post-scarcity society faces, they're really
Hmm.
fucking good. Yeah, and it's like I'm kind of I used to be an anarchist. I'm not for pragmatic reasons these days, but like ideally, if we can,
Well, sure. Yeah, just to be clear, like I never really advocate for anarchy very
yeah, yeah.
much.
No,
Like
I've
I
seen some of
only,
your stuff, yeah, and
yeah,
you
yeah,
seem like rational incrementalist kind of dude. So yeah,
yeah.
but like ideally, yeah, anarchy would be super cool, especially if we can just have AIs like fairly determining everything. Um, and that's kind of the dream, or living in whatever kind of society you want, because it's all handed to you by AIs. That'd be very cool. Um, but yeah, in order to get there, we need to get past this big risk. So I would say in terms of kind of messaging and what we can do, um, talking about AI risk and talking about it in a reasoned way. So I mean the fact that you're aware of the boxing problem and uh, have kindly invited me on to speak indicates that you're probably not one to go shouting about Terminators taking over or whatever.
No, yeah,
Um, so basically, keep up with that. Keep on explaining that it's not just universally terrifying. There are a hell of a lot of benefits that can come from it, but we need to build safety culture into the bedrock of every major company and every major research organization that is developing this. And we need to start talking about international cooperation, not so much to heavily regulate now, but to work with the companies, work with the research institutions, and try to develop some international frameworks for looking into areas that maybe are particularly risky and that we should try to slow research into, or areas that would be particularly good for security or safety that we can speed up and focus research efforts into. So it's let me just check the precipice, see if there's any major prescriptions I'm missing, because there is a he's got a good list at the back of the here we go. So AI. So yeah, foster international collaboration on safety and risk management, explore options for the governance of advanced AI, perform technical research on aligning advanced artificial intelligence with human values, and perform technical research on other aspects of AGI safety, such as secure containment and tripwires. Secure containment is what. Yeah, I'm boomer as fuck. I got loads of books. Actually, I should check the PDF because I've got it on PDF as well. Also, get the audiobook because Toby Ord, the author, reads it, and he's a very good audio book reader. So yeah. So yeah, basically those are the kind of policies that we need to, I think, consider. And unfortunately, there's like no part of the problem with these existential risks is there's often no obvious like single solution, because if there were, we probably would have dealt with it. Um,
yeah.
uh,
I
yeah.
guess sort of the things that I advocate for, I guess at least politically, in terms of trying to deal with these risks,
Mm,
I think something like antitrust laws are really important to make sure that not like to make sure that Amazon doesn't have like complete control over sort of AI technology once it comes out. And I think something like I guess looking at like big authoritarian regimes,
mm,
trying as much as possible to give as much power to like workers' hands to make sure that at least when we have sort of the capabilities to develop AI in any kind of way, that it would be as many people as possible sort of
mm,
having a say there. Because I think all of the biggest risks, at least that I can think of short term, would be a very few people controlling sort of the AI technology in
mm.
some sense or the other. So either through like a big corporation or like an authoritarian regime or whatever. And I think the biggest way to alleviate that risk would probably be to spread out who has a say in what happens. Um, I don't know what you think about
Yeah.
that.
I haven't actually heard of antitrust law as a way of ameliorating AI risk, but I think that's a very interesting strategy to take. So certainly one of the big concerns of AI isn't necessarily that the AI itself is going to be troubling, but that because it's such a powerful technology, whoever develops it first could
Yeah,
become a
exactly.
singleton, which is
Yeah.
one entity that has, complete control over the world, or at least within a certain domain.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's the one I'm more afraid of, I think.
mm.
Um
Well,
or at least that's the one I feel like we have the most control over, sort of, I guess, prohibiting. Cuz
yeah.
fuck, I mean, I feel like the other one, like the one where the AI itself is just too smart to be able to do anything about. I feel like that one is hard to wrap your brain around, like how we could ever prevent that. Because I feel like all these solutions that we have are flawed in one way or another, currently at least.
So there are some reasons to believe, and this is over my head. I'm not in machine learning, but there are some reasons to believe that we could develop code that, at least in certain contexts, is provably safe. Um, that
Well,
it's
yeah, it's yeah, in some contexts, sure.
yeah. Of course, the in some contexts is a big uh, big caveat there, but yeah, I think so. One of the existential risks that I didn't touch on directly was the possibility of totalitarianism, which counts as an existential risk because potentially it could reduce the value of human experience to such a degree that the typical human life is basically not worth living. Which, although it hasn't literally killed us all, could lock us into a state indefinitely where everything is really, really shit. So, if the Nazi government had taken over the world, there's a potential that a small potential of the population would be having a good time, and most of the world's population would be having a absolutely god awful, terrible time. Um, and if that got locked in to the point that we couldn't get out of that situation, then that's an existential risk. Um, and if Hitler had had super powerful AI, that would I mean, anarchism, if it did completely ruin the quality of life and get locked in, then yeah, I would suspect that the system that Dario is chatting about probably isn't quite
Yeah,
that
I
bad,
mean,
but
obviously, yeah.
um,
I mean,
yeah,
I think most systems have the
mm,
possibility to end very badly.
absolutely, yeah, and
Yeah,
and it's one of the reasons why politics does very much matter. It's not always easy to quantify, but if you're in the US, please, for the love of God, vote Biden. Please, please vote Biden. I beg of you. I beg of you. Just like I'm not in the US, so I can't.
oh
But I'm going to be phone banking, and we don't have to pretend that Biden is the most ideal candidate ever, but he's far less likely to cause nuclear war. He's far less likely to. I mean, the fucking Obama administration, right? They left a wonderful guidebook, an excellent, excellent playbook for addressing pandemic risk. They had a superb the Global Health Security Directorate. Brilliant, brilliant interdisciplinary, like interorganizational, like council that could direct these big picture issues in biosecurity. Trump just did away with that last year, and now the US has 100,000, more, well over 100,000, but 100,000 reported deaths. And if it had been one of the diseases we were talking about earlier, Trump would have potentially ended the US as a meaningful institution. If half the US's population died, compared with the other countries that had managed to contain it, had maybe 10, 20% death rate. But if half the US population died, that's basically the country fucked. Like, someone's going to invade, the society's going to collapse. It's going to be absolute terror, and that's not even an existential risk. This is just something that's kind of within the bounds of natural pandemics. So, for the love of all that is good and true, vote Biden. Just if you don't like it, hold your nose. Vote Biden.
I think with those wonderful words, think we'll say thank you very much for today. I would very much
Yeah,
like
thanks.
to I'd very much like to speak to you in the future as well.
Sure, yeah, anytime.
Um,
Just give me a shout. And
cool.
I mean, I'm awake at all kinds of weird times. My sleep schedule is terrible, so if you ever need like a take on science policy or anything like that, give me a shout.
Hell yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks very much for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you've enjoyed.
I did very much. Thank you so
Cool.
much, and I'll see you around.
Yeah. See ya. Ah, that was nice. See what he has to say about me.
Post normal. Very cool dude. Fuck. I feel like this felt like
Doing some
sitting
reaction
in on a
content.
lecture and being able to ask questions and sort of direct the conversation a little bit. I actually really enjoyed that. If I could in some way fucking set that up for like any kind of topic where somebody who's like super informed on the topic would just speak to me and I would just be able to ask questions in real time. that's like that's like the best way. I feel like, yeah, it was good content. Um, all right. Book smarts. Do you wanna talk? Do you wanna talk?
Right.
You can just hop on my.
Okay. I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you very much, anyone who's watching, and thanks, Dario. That was lovely. Um, Twitch has been a remarkably inviting community by the standards of what I was led to believe. And yeah, cool dude. Um, Looking forward to chatting in the future. Right, thanks to my new followers, and thanks to NebTV, who was very entertaining. And I will